My hand froze. At the bottom was my signature. And a receipt for $100,000 for my brother Kevin's wedding. Only it wasn't my signature. I never signed it, it was forged. The envelope was waiting for me in the mailbox, like a regular electricity bill. I tossed it on the kitchen table, but when I saw the logo, Riverdale Country Club and Events, something tightened in my chest. I had never had anything to do with that place. I tore open the envelope and pulled out a sheet of paper with a gold crest. My hand froze. At the bottom was my signature. And a receipt for $100,000 for my brother Kevin's wedding. I stared at the neat loops in the poised slant, at the tidy flourish at the end of my last name, and felt a cold line trace the length of my spine. Kevin had once forged late notes and parking passes. Now he had forged my future. The kitchen smelled like coffee and dust. My mug lay cracked, a brown arc spreading across the tile like a map of places I might never see. For a moment I could not tell if the shaking in my hands was rage or relief, the relief of finally recognizing the truth of my family, as plain and sharp as the ink on the page. I dialed the number printed beneath the crest. A bright voice answered, trained to smile through the phone. She congratulated me before I said a word. She repeated the figure, 100,000, like it was a bouquet. I thanked her because I didn't trust my voice not to break, and then I sat with the receipt while the room hummed. I thought about the 2 jobs, the double shifts, the months when I had allowed my hair to grow heavy because haircuts were a luxury. I thought about the first apartment listings I had saved in Porto and Lisbon and Bruges, each with a little balcony and a window that held morning light. In the central Appalachian flats where we lived, east of Columbus, west of the Allegheny Ridges, work was a shrug. My parents called themselves freelancers and kept 4-hour days like a proud diet. Enough for gas and groceries, Dad would say, lifting his feet onto the coffee table. Family fills the gaps, Mom would add, glancing at me. And family meant me. The responsible one. The one with the steady paycheck and the soft no that always collapsed into yes. Sunday dinner turned the lie into theater. Aunts kissed my hair and called me a saint. Dad boomed that I had insisted on Riverdale because my brother deserved a fairy tale. Kevin grinned, tugging at the cuff of a shirt I suspected was also bought with money that had once been mine. Even the cousins I barely knew offered thanks from the edges of the room, as if gratitude could be drafted like a check. I smiled without showing teeth and memorized the scene. Someday I would tell it to someone who did not doubt me. That night I made a spreadsheet. I logged the gas money and the bailouts and the little loans that had never returned, the textbooks for community college, the stitches in the back tire, the deposits that became gifts. The total climbed. 47,600. A number I had earned one early morning at a time. I whispered the cities again, Porto, Lisbon, Bruges, and pulled my passport from the shoebox where I kept it safe. On the back I taped a note, "Do not abandon yourself." By dawn I had a plan that felt like an exit ramp: freeze the cards, challenge the charge, document the forgery, gather the texts where I said no. I opened a blank document and began the letter to Riverdale, my sentences clean and careful the way my designs were at work. I was done being an ATM with a pulse. I was done calling theft a misunderstanding. I called the club again and asked for billing. I kept my tone neutral, professional. Could they confirm the authorizing party? The agent read my name slowly, letter by letter, and the last 4 digits of a card I keep locked away. She apologized, promised to escalate, and gave me a case number. I wrote it in my notebook and underlined the date. Solid ground. At noon I walked past the grain silos and the auto shop where Kevin still owed for a starter. The town held you with familiar turns and slow lights. My phone buzzed, Mom about linen colors, Dad about an open bar. I placed the phone face down and let the screen die. In my apartment, I opened a shoebox marked passport. Behind it were 4 envelopes labeled by month. I had been feeding them for 3 years, every bonus, every commission, every tip. Europe was not a poster. It was a scaffold of small, relentless choices, a home with a balcony and morning light instead of a chorus of needs dressed as love. I thought of Kevin at 11, cheeks smudged, promising to put the coins back. I believed him. I thought of Dad praising his 4-hour workdays like a parlor trick. I thought of Mom calling me dependable as if it were a destiny instead of a habit. Dependable had become a leash. I pressed my palm to the receipt and felt it break. Outside, a storm simmered without falling. I pictured a road pulling east, a line that did not bend back home. I inhaled slowly. I spent Monday morning turning panic into paperwork. I wrote the letter to Riverdale and attached scans of my ID, the sample signatures from my license renewal, and a clear statement that I had not authorized any expense. Then I called my bank and placed fraud alerts on every card that could have been used. The agent, a woman named Bree with a voice like warm tea, walked me through creating a temporary freeze on my credit. She read a case number and told me to keep it handy. I printed the email and slid it into a growing folder labeled Evidence. By noon I was at the county sheriff's office. The building smelled like old paperwork and lemon cleaner. A deputy with a high-end-tight haircut listened to my summary, typed for a long minute, and finally handed me a form to sign. "We can't promise a prosecution," he said carefully, "but this is identity theft. Get us copies of the venue contract and any messages you have. Keep notes. Dates matter. Dates matter." I wrote it at the top of the page in all caps and underlined it twice. At work, the hours held. We design kitchens and living rooms for people who want their houses to feel more like themselves. "Your mood board looks like an escape hatch," Caleb said quietly, glancing at the folder. "It is," I answered. "And this time I'm taking it." By evening my phone had turned into a hive. Mom wanted decisions about centerpieces. Dad sent a spreadsheet with costs for a band. Kevin asked if I could float the deposit for the rehearsal dinner since, quote, "it was all in the same spirit." I typed and deleted a dozen replies before setting the device in a drawer and turning the key. I made soup from what I had, listened to the rain against the windows, and drafted the kind of boundaries I had only ever practiced in my head. A little thunder rolled along the flats, a sound like furniture moved. I wrote sentences index card and taped it to fridge. "You are not a wallet. You are not a witness. You belong to yourself." Tuesday brought a bright email subject line, "Payment schedule reminder." I read the dates twice. An installment of $22,000 was due in 3 days to avoid cancellation. I called Riverdale and was routed to someone higher up, Ms. Nolan, polished voice, careful diction. I explained again. She listened down to the commas. "We'll put a temporary hold and note the dispute," she said, "but your family will be notified." My throat tightened. "I understand." The notifications began within an hour. First, a family group text, Mom praising me for my commitment, Dad asking me to confirm the hold was just administrative, Kevin sending a string of party hat emojis. Then the private messages arrived, thinly sugar-coated pressure. I copied them all into the file. I took screenshots of every time I had said no in the last 2 months. I printed them and added dates in the margins. That night I met Maya in the grocery store parking lot, because talking in my apartment made me feel watched by my own walls. Maya had known me since I was 16 and saving for a used Corolla. She listened, arms folded, the hood of her sweatshirt dark with drizzle. "What's your cleanest exit?" she asked when I finished. "Freeze the credit. Cancel the cards. Put Riverdale on notice. Pack the essentials. Leave on a day they're distracted." "When is that?" "Saturday," I said. "Cake tasting." We sat with the wipers ticking. "If you need me," she said finally, "I'll be behind you for the first 100 miles." I went home and arranged my life into 3 piles: keep, sell, give. I told the landlord I might be relocating for work. He said to send notice if it came to that. I found my birth certificate in the cedar box and tucked it with the passport. I posed the question I had been circling for months: was I willing to be the villain in a story they told at holidays if it meant I could be the hero in my own? I did not answer. Not yet. On Wednesday, Ms. Nolan called back. "We've flagged the file," she said, "and we'll need a handwriting affidavit if this proceeds." I scheduled it with a notary for Thursday lunch and told my boss I had an appointment. He nodded, eyes kind. Caleb slipped a note onto my keyboard: "If you need a truck, say the word." I smiled, folded the paper, and put it in my wallet with the case number. That evening, Kevin appeared at my door. He smelled faintly of beer and laundry soap. "You could have come to me first," he said without saying hello. "We're family." I kept the door at my hip. "You signed my name." He looked off to the side, calculating charm. "It's not like you were going to say no forever." "I already did," I said. "Dozens of times." His mouth tightened. "So what? You're going to ruin my wedding?" I thought about the word ruin and how it had only ever been used when I tried to save myself. "I'm going to stop letting you ruin my life," I answered, and closed the door gently before I could see his face harden. At midnight, I woke to the sense that something had shifted. Not in the hallway. In me. I opened the window and let the cool air wash over the room. Somewhere beyond the ridges, the interstate pulled east. If I followed it long enough, it would lead to a coastline and a flight and a key in a door I had chosen on my own. Thursday lunch found me in a strip mall office that smelled faintly of carpet glue. The notary, a woman with kind eyes and a polka-dot scarf, watched me sign the affidavit and then pressed a raised seal into the paper. The sound, metal kissing paper, felt ceremonial. I slipped the document into the evidence folder and thanked her twice. Outside, the sky was a hard blue. I sat in my car and bought a one-way ticket on my phone. I did it quickly, before doubt could put a hand on my wrist. Cincinnati to Newark, Newark to Lisbon. Saturday night. The total flashed and then cleared. I read the confirmation number 3 times. The email landed in my inbox with a small chime that sounded like a gate unlocking. At the office, I tied up projects and documented everything so no one else would be left holding a bag with my name on it. Caleb kept glancing at me as if he sensed the frequency had changed. "You're steadier," he said in the break room. "Because I'm moving," I answered, halfway to a smile. He nodded like he had expected it all along. In the evening, I drove to my parents' house with a box of old books I told myself I would donate from their garage. Dad's routine had never changed: keys in the top right drawer of the tool bench, spare fob in the ceramic bowl by the back door. The garage smelled like gasoline, worn leather, and the faint sweetness of sawdust that had been rained on and dried a dozen times. I placed the books on a shelf, touched the drawer handle, and let my hand slide away. Not yet. Mom popped her head in with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. You'll come by Saturday after the tasting, right? We want to show you the cake design. I'll try, I said, and tasted the lilac metal. Back home, I made lists. I paired my life into a single checked suitcase and a backpack, passport, birth certificate, wallet, 2 pairs of shoes that could go anywhere, 3 neutral dresses that could be layered into 4 seasons, a jacket that could find work. I rolled my sketchbooks and slipped them into a mailing tube addressed to myself in Portugal. I photographed every page before I sealed it. I packed my grandmother's ring and left the heavy furniture behind. It had been beautiful in the apartment, it would be an anchor in the airport. Friday morning, a message from Ms. Nolan was waiting. She had received the affidavit and paused all charges pending review. The venue, she wrote, would be contacting the party listed as planner. I could feel the ripple before it reached me. At 9, the group chat exploded. Mom resent a photo of peonies with a caption about elegance. Dad wrote that grown-ups talk things through, not around. Kevin, dropping pretense, asked me why I enjoyed creating chaos. I stared at the screen long enough for my reflection to appear in the black glass and then powered the phone off. In the quiet that followed, the apartment felt bigger. Maya showed up that evening with a trunk full of boxes and a carton of takeout dumplings. We worked in a rhythm we had learned in college moves: wrap, tape, label, wrap, tape, label. When we were done, I had a grid of boxes ready to load, a stack to donate, and a small pile that would go into the back seat at dawn. Text me when you're on the interstate, she said. If you don't, I'll assume you need me to knock on a door. I laughed and promised. The last night in any place is the truest portrait of it. Mine looked like a floor lined with boxes and a single lamp. I sat cross-legged with my passport open and wrote down everything that did not fit in a suitcase: the smell of the diner at 5 a.m., the way winter sun angled through the laundromat window, the glint of mica in the asphalt on the road to the reservoir. I wrote the town a quiet goodbye and then wrote myself a louder hello. At dawn on Saturday, I drove to a storage unit to drop off the donations and to the bank to withdraw cash. I left the teller window with an envelope I hoped I would not have to open. When I returned home, there was a voicemail from Dad. His voice walked a line I knew too well, genial until it wasn't. Remember, family takes care of family, he said. We'll swing by later so you can see the cake sketches. Don't run off. I placed the phone on the counter and studied the keys on the hook by my door: work, apartment, mailbox, small teeth that had defined my radius. By this time tomorrow, new keys would sit in my palm. Until then, I had one errand left that could not be named. I texted Maya a single word: Saturday. She answered with a green check. I loaded the last box into the hall and propped my apartment door open. I washed the coffee mug I had glued, the one that broke the day the receipt arrived, and set it gently at the back of a cupboard. Then I stood in the middle of the room and let the quiet rest on my shoulders. The silence did not feel like absence. It felt like room. I locked the door, listened to my footsteps, and said at last, I am leaving, and I am not coming back. By late morning the sky had softened into a bright, reckless blue. At 11:58, a family text arrived: leaving now for tasting. I watched the dots of replies, exclamation points and hearts, and a photo of Kevin in a blazer that did not fit his shoulders. I waited 10 minutes more, long enough for Habit to beg for one last reconsideration, and then I picked up my backpack and walked to my car. The drive to my parents' house took 12 minutes. I could have done it with my eyes closed. Muscle memory did most of the steering. I parked a block away and walked the rest, heart bumping in a steady drum. The backyard gate squeaked the same high note it had sung since I was 5. Inside the garage, dust motes spun in a shaft of light. I opened the right-hand drawer and found the keys exactly where Dad always left them. For a moment I simply held them. The fob was warm from the sun. The car, a silver sedan, waited like a line I could step across. I moved fast. Backpack on the passenger seat, small suitcase in the trunk, folder of documents beside me. I checked the fuel, the oil light, the mirror angles I already knew. I turned the key. The engine woke with the soft confidence of a machine maintained just enough. I pulled the garage door shut with the rope and slipped out the side as cleanly as a page turned. On the way out of town, every stoplight felt like a question. I answered by keeping my foot steady. The radio offered a song from high school. I turned it off and chose the sound of road. Past the grain silos, past the diner, past the library, I stitched the landmarks into a farewell. At the county line the asphalt widened and the horizon lowered its shoulders so I could pass. The Interstate East is a long sentence with few commas. Trucks shouldered by Ohio flattened into Pennsylvania hills. Maya called and let it ring twice, our signal. I answered and breathed. "Keep going," she said. "I'm 10 miles behind. You're doing this." I wanted to cry and didn't. Tears felt like something I could spend later if I needed them. By the time the skyline of a larger world began to sharpen, my phone, switched on for maps, flooded with messages. "Mom, 3 in a row, where are you? The planner needs you to approve the napkin font. Call me now. Dad, we can work through this, but you're making a scene. Don't embarrass Kevin. Kevin, if you bail, that's on you. You'll always be the one who ruined it." I let the screen dim and disappear. The only voice I allowed in the car was my own. At a gas station outside Newark, I bought water and stood in the shade counting the bills in my pocket. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed at the planes gliding low beyond the overpass. He jumped every time a jet roared. I watched him and decided to be the version of myself who could jump for joy without checking who might disapprove. I parked the car in long-term lot C and memorized the row. I took a photo of the sign and then of the dashboard. The keys felt heavy in my palm. I locked the doors, snapped the spare fob into the glove compartment, and kept the primary in my bag. I would decide what to do with them later. Right now there was only forward. Inside the terminal, the air conditioning hit me like a new country. I checked in, moved through security with my folder ready, and stood barefoot on the cold tiles while a stranger studied the contents of my life in a gray bin. When the agent waved me through, I felt lighter than I had in years. I watched a jet taxi past. "Patient," my name came through the loudspeaker, mispronounced but close. I stood, shouldered my bag, and walked to the counter. The agent scanned my boarding pass and handed it back as if it were an ordinary thing, not a passport to a life where I could wake up without calculating who would need what. At the jetway door I looked back once, not because I doubted but because I wanted to mark this exact angle of light, this exact hum of engines, this exact second where I chose myself. Then I stepped forward. On the plane, I took a window seat and pressed my forehead to the cool plastic. The safety demo blurred into a soft choreography. The engines rose into a steady thunder. As we lifted, the runway unspooled, the long-term lot shrank to a grid, and the city folded into a puzzle I no longer had to solve. Cloud closed around us and I let my eyes do the same. Somewhere over the Atlantic I woke to darkness and a stranger's sleeping breath beside me. I stared at the seatback map, the tiny plane inching toward a coast I had only ever seen in postcards and browser tabs. I touched my pocket to feel the ridge of my passport. It felt like a promise I could hold. When the cabin lights blinked on for breakfast, I wrote one last message and saved it as a draft. Not to send yet. Not until I was gone enough that the response could not reach me. The car is safe. Long-term lot C, row 7, space 34. The keys will be at the information desk under your name. I'm done being borrowed. Lisbon arrived first as light, white sun sheeting over red roofs, and then as sound, 100 conversations braided into a single, warm hum. I stepped off the plane and read the signs like they were kind instructions from an older sister I had just met. The stamp hit my passport with a soft authority. I found a corner by a window, opened my email, and sent the message I had saved. The car is safe. Long-term lot C, row 7, space 34. The keys will be at the information desk under your name. I'm done being borrowed. I bought a Metro card and followed the blue line uphill, suitcase wheels rattling a cheerful apology across Old Stone. The room I had arranged online was smaller than the photos and more honest: a bed, a table, a narrow closet, a slice of river visible between two buildings like a secret shared only with morning. I opened the window and let the city in. Seagulls laughed like rowdy cousins. Somewhere below, cutlery chimed against porcelain. Jet lag is half physics, half absolution. I slept and woke and washed my face and slept again. By afternoon I could stand in one time zone without part of me reaching back. I made a list titled First Week and filled it with verbs: register, open, print, walk, learn. Then I did them in order. I registered for a tax number. I opened a bank account. I walked until my shoes learned the hills. I learned how to ask for coffee the way locals did and how to say thank you the way I meant it. Work was not a promise, it was a conversation waiting to be started. On Tuesday I visited 3 design studios, portfolios under my arm, nerves hidden under a pressed shirt. At the second, a woman named Leonore flipped through my drawings with slow attention. "You think in light," she said finally. "We could use that." She asked about visas. I told her the truth. She nodded and suggested contract projects to start. I kept my phone on airplane mode except for the moments I needed it. When I checked, the messages had rearranged themselves into a new pattern: early anger giving way to bargaining, bargaining to silence. Mom had emailed a paragraph about disappointment and family. Dad had sent a terse line: return the car. Kevin's messages, though, stopped after 2. As if the performance made no sense without an audience. I wrote a reply I didn't send: I returned the car to your name. I returned the weight to its source. I kept my life. Instead, I sent the receipt from the information desk with Dad's ID listed as pickup. There was a satisfaction in that: clean paperwork, a tidy line drawn under a long column of messy arithmetic. The days arranged themselves around small anchors. Morning coffee at the cafe with the blue tiles. An hour of Portuguese on the park bench with a paperback and a highlighter. Sketches by the river where ferries cut white rips in the water. I told Maya about the studio. She told me about the 3 boxes she rescued from my curb after the move. Your past should be curated, she said. Not stored in bulk. Leonore's first project needed eyes and hands within a week. I measured a narrow apartment with tiles older than my parents' marriage and planned a kitchen that respected the walls while admitting more mourning. We spoke in a hybrid of languages and tape measures. When I sent the concept board, she wrote back a single word: beautiful. Home, I realized, was a verb. It needed choosing. It required maintenance. I lit a candle in the window and told the room the same thing I had told myself on the interstate: keep going. Endings have a way of sharpening what came before. In the quiet, I could hear the shape of the manipulations more clearly, how requests were framed as love, how excuses were stitched into ethics. In therapy, if I found it here, I would give those tactics names. For now, I did something simpler. When a worry arrived in the voice of my childhood, I answered in my own. On Friday, a letter came to my inbox from Ms. Nolan. Riverdale had cancelled the contract for non-payment after the hold and the handwriting dispute. She thanked me for my documentation and wished my family well in navigating alternate arrangements. I exhaled a breath I must have been holding since the day I opened the mailbox back home. I closed my eyes and pictured the kitchen I would one day build for myself, clean lines, light, a table big enough for the life I was choosing. That weekend I walked along the river until the pavement turned to a path, and the path turned to steps, and the steps turned to a view of red roofs flowing downhill like a story told in one direction only. A tourist asked me for directions and I gave them, surprised by how easily the words came. After, I bought a small, rough clay mug from a market stall and carried it home in both hands as if it might teach me not to break what held me. I returned the rental sheets, bought second-hand plates, and wrote my name on the mailbox. Neighbors began to nod. A baker started setting aside last roll for me when I was late. News from home did not arrive as a wave, it came like weather, changing and then explained. Maya forwarded an invitation update that had appeared on a cousin's social media. Venue changed, guest count halved, ceremony moved to a park pavilion strung with borrowed lights. Kevin's fiancée posted a photo of cupcakes instead of a tiered cake, her grin the same size either way. My father picked up the car at the desk 2 days after I landed. He sent a single text that read received. I answered with none. Silence expanded into a new room I learned to live in. There were days I missed the ease of being needed, the way saying yes came with a rush of belonging. But belonging, I realized, cannot be rented. It becomes a mortgage, ballooning in the dark. I lit candles for the past and opened windows for the future and washed the grief out of my hair with a cheap shampoo that smelled like lemons and noon. Leonor introduced me to her colleague Duarte, who needed help staging model units in a renovated warehouse by the river. We worked until midnight measuring walls and hanging curtains that made factory light look like morning. On a corkboard I pinned the boarding pass from Newark and the index card in my pocket. When doubt grew noisy, I touched them and remembered the moment my life tilted toward itself. Now the studio job became a steady thread. I learned the names of screws in Portuguese and the shortcuts on a new CAD program. I learned which suppliers believed in quality and which believed in gloss. I learned I could sit in a room and be the least fluent and still hold my own. At the end of one long day, Duarte tapped the light plan. "You think in light," he said, unknowingly echoing Leonor. "Keep doing that." I walked home under street lamps that felt like cousins. When Mom finally wrote, the subject line was a single word, talk. The body was longer. There were apologies edged with explanations, and a paragraph about memories, and a question about whether I could reconsider family contributions when I was settled. I read it twice, waited a week, and then answered with 3 boundaries and 1 invitation: I will not lend money. I will not co-sign. I will not be shamed for saying no. If you want to visit, I will meet you in the city and we can walk by the water and talk about art and bread and everything that is not debt. She did not answer for 2 weeks. When she did, it was with a photo of sun on the backyard lawn and a message that said, simply, I am trying. It was not everything. It was a beginning that did not cost me anything I could not afford to give. When the wedding day came, I did not check the time. I painted a bookshelf instead, the brush rising and falling like a tide I set myself. Later, Maya texted me a video, vows in a park, wind flicking the veil, someone's dog shaking water onto the groomsman's shoes. Kevin looked happy. Maybe he would learn. Maybe he would not. That was not a weight I had to carry across an ocean anymore. On a Sunday, months after landing, I took the train to the coast and walked until the pavement surrendered to sand. I sat where the water negotiated with the shore and wrote the story as far as I knew it: a girl raised to be dependable, a receipt like a detonator, an engine turning, a path east, a window flung open to salt and light. I wrote the parts one had left behind and the parts one had carried and the parts still to be built. When I finished, I folded the pages and tucked them into a book whose spine was already cracked by other brave hands. As the sun slipped, my phone buzzed with a number I knew by heart. I let it ring and stop and ring again, then answered. Dad's voice was softer than I remembered. He said they had managed. He said they had figured things out. He said he hoped I was well. I told him about the river and the bread and the project with the laughably narrow staircase. He asked about the car. I said I hoped it was finally maintained. He asked if I needed anything. I said no. After the call, I walked to the edge of a pier that reached into the evening and let the wind decide which hair to rearrange. I thought of the phrase "family takes care of family" and wondered what it could mean without the coercion stitched into it. Maybe it could mean that I took care of me, and they learned to take care of themselves, and when we met it would be as people who chose, not demanded. I went home to a room that smelled like paint and bread and the candle I lit at dusk. I set the clay mug on the table and poured water into it like a blessing. I stood at the window where the river threaded itself between roofs and said the 3 lines I had been carrying since the gate: keep the promise. Keep the case number. Keep going. And then, because the future was not a place I would arrive at but a room I would build one wall at a time, I sat down and drew the next morning in pencil, light first, then shape, then color. I labeled the drawing with my name. Not the forged one. Mine.